not all revolutions announce themselves. Some begin in silence. In an aging laboratory in London, a man returns from holiday and notices a strange mold growing on a forgotten dish. Harmless? No, it was lethal. But not to him. It was killing something else, something we'd been powerless against for centuries. What came next would save millions. Alexander Fleming was not the kind of man history usually notices. He wasn't loud. He wasn't charming in the traditional sense. And yet, from the very beginning, he saw the world differently. Born in 1881 on a windswept Scottish farm, Fleming was the seventh of 8 children. His days were quiet, surrounded by sheep, soil, and silence. A mind always watching, always wondering. Where others saw monotony in farm chores, he noticed patterns. The way mold grew on damp walls, the strange resilience of life in harsh places. By the time World War I came, he was a trained doctor. But on the battlefield, he witnessed something even more brutal than bullets: infection. Wounded soldiers, patched up from combat, dying slowly from fevers, pus-filled wounds, sepsis. They fought for their country, only to be undone by microbes. Fleming felt helpless. Some men returned from war with medals. Fleming returned with a question: how do we stop what we cannot see? It was a seemingly ordinary day in September 1928. Alexander Fleming returned to his cluttered lab at St. Mary's Hospital after a short vacation. Papers lay scattered, Petri dishes sat forgotten, and dust clung to glass slides. Most would have seen a mess. Fleming saw a puzzle. Among the dishes, one stood out. A patch of mold had taken root, likely airborne, an accident. But what caught his eye was what surrounded it. A clear halo where bacteria had vanished, killed, dissolved. Where others would have cleaned the dish, Fleming leaned closer, observed, tested. The mold was Penicillium notatum. The substance it produced, penicillin, didn't harm human cells, but obliterated deadly bacteria. It wasn't contamination, it was a breakthrough. He called it penicillin. It wasn't just a lucky accident, it was a moment of attention, of not looking away when something odd appeared. Fleming hadn't merely discovered a new compound. He had cracked open a door, one that medicine had been blindly knocking on for centuries. And yet, few would listen. Fleming's discovery could have changed everything. But at first, it changed nothing. In 1929, he published a short paper describing the antibacterial properties of penicillin. There was no fanfare, no headlines. The world barely noticed. The problem wasn't the science, it was the science of the time. Penicillin was fragile, unstable, difficult to isolate, and nearly impossible to store. Fleming lacked the tools and team to turn his finding into a functional drug. He tried, quietly, to raise interest, but with no practical way to mass-produce or preserve penicillin, enthusiasm faded. In hospitals and universities, his name was respected, but not celebrated. For a decade, his moldy Petri dish sat forgotten in storage. His notes gathered dust. The silence around his work grew heavy. Even Fleming began to move on. But the story wasn't over. The world was marching toward another war, and with it would come new wounds. And the same ancient enemies: infection, sepsis, death. In Oxford, a team of scientists scoured medical literature for forgotten ideas. And in that silence, in the overlooked paragraphs of a quiet genius, they found it. Penicillin would rise again, and this time, the world would listen. The world had forgotten Fleming's discovery, a paper buried in the pages of a quiet journal, a mold that once showed promise, now reduced to a scientific footnote. But history doesn't forget forever. In the late 1930s, as Europe braced for another world war, science became desperate. Bullets and bombs were only half the danger. The real enemy was infection, amputations, sepsis, the same silent killers Fleming had witnessed years ago. At the University of Oxford, Australian pathologist Howard Florey and German-born biochemist Ernst Chain were combing through old medical literature, looking for anything that could fight bacteria. That's when they found it. Fleming's obscure 1929 paper. It was brief, unpolished, but something in it gleamed. Together with Norman Heatley, a young biochemist with endless ingenuity, they revived what had been left to die. But penicillin was fragile. It degraded quickly. Scaling it was a nightmare. So they became inventors as much as scientists, growing the mold in milk churns, ceramics, pie tins, and even bedpans. They worked in secrecy, with urgency. The war was closing in. In 1941, they gave penicillin to a man dying of sepsis. His fever broke. His infection retreated. But the drug ran out too soon. He died, just as hope had arrived. Still, the team had seen something extraordinary. Penicillin could work. It just needed scale. And now, the race to save millions had truly begun. The truth was undeniable. Penicillin worked. But there wasn't enough. Not even close. Florey's team had proven its power, only to watch a man die when the supply ran dry. Now they faced an impossible question. How do you mass-produce a miracle? The mold was temperamental. It yielded mere micrograms of medicine. They needed kilograms, tons, so they improvised. Norman Heatley, the quiet genius of the lab, rewrote the rules. He designed clay vessels, bedpan fermenters, even bathtub-sized vats to grow the mold. Every drop of penicillin was precious, so he invented a way to recycle it, extracting the drug again and again. But Oxford's labs were too small. The war? Too big. Then a secret call to America. Florey flew across the Atlantic, his coat lined with penicillin samples, worth more than gold. The US government listened. Pharmaceutical giants listened. Soon, factories that once made explosives were retooled to brew medicine. By 1943, deep in the war's shadow, the first industrial batches rolled out, not in vials, but in barrels. The Allies now had a weapon no enemy could replicate, a drug that turned death sentences into recoveries. And when D-Day arrived, penicillin went with them. By 1943, the impossible was happening. Factories, once churning out bombs, now brewed life in steel vats. Rivers of golden penicillin flowed, straight to the front lines. And the results? Nothing short of miraculous. Soldiers with festering wounds, doomed to die in agony, woke up without fever. Children on the brink of septicemia laughed again. Mothers kissed sons who'd survived because of a moldy dish left forgotten a decade earlier. This wasn't just medicine. It was alchemy. Nature's deadliest microbes, defeated by nature itself. But the real magic? Scale. By D-Day in 1944, 2.3 million doses surged through Allied forces. Survival rates for infected wounds plummeted from 20% to near zero. Hospitals, once echoing with screams, fell eerily quiet, not from death, but from healing. Yet the greatest victory, after the war, penicillin spilled into civilian life. Pneumonia? Cured. Syphilis? Stopped. Childbirth infections? No longer a death sentence. Lifespans jumped. Surgeries transformed. And humanity, for the first time in history, held the upper hand against the invisible killers that had hunted us since the dawn of time. All because one man saw what others threw away. Alexander Fleming didn't conquer the world with an army. He didn't shout louder or push harder. He simply saw, truly saw, what others dismissed as nothing. A contaminated dish, a failed experiment, a mistake. This was the moment that changed everything. But it's just one of many. For every Fleming, there are 100 untold stories. The accidental breakthroughs, the quiet revolutions, the overlooked ideas that reshaped our world. This is why we're here, to uncover how one moment changed everything. If you want to uncover the forgotten breakthroughs, the hidden minds, and the silent revolutions that shaped our world, subscribe, stay curious, and remember, it's the tiniest things that often leave the biggest mark.